What is going on, everybody? Hope everybody's enjoying their Wednesday so far. We are back with some more fantasy football content in our fantasy live show that we're doing here every Tuesday or Wednesday night. We're going to be talking about what happened in week number 10, go through some notes, some news, and some injuries that you need to be looking ahead for heading into week number 11 of this fantasy football season. We're just a couple of weeks away from the start of the fantasy playoffs. So this race for the playoffs is only starting to heat up. So hopefully you can get on a winning streak and get yourself into the playoffs and win yourself a fantasy championship for this 2025 and 2026 NFL season. So as always here, we're going to be giving you your week 11 starts and sits, as well as looking at how our team did in week number 10. We will see if we continued our winning streak or not. So let's go ahead and dive in as we always do here. We like to start off with our week 10 recap first before we shift gears into week number 11. So let's go ahead and go through our studs and duds of the week. And before I do that, I do want to remind our viewers, if you do have any questions pertaining to trades or starts and sits questions, or just any particular question that you have for fantasy football for this week, let me know down in the comments and I'll get to it throughout the duration of this show tonight. So let's go ahead and start off with our quarterback stud of the week, and that's going to be Jackson Dart of the New York Giants. So I know that the Giants did end up losing this game to the Chicago Bears, and Dart did get injured in this game, but Dart continues to be sensational in fantasy football. 242 passing yards. He didn't have any passing touchdowns. Most of his point totals came in the fantasy point totals in the rushing department. 6 rushing attempts, 66 rushing yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns. So that rushing volume continues to be there for Jackson Dart. So 26.28 fantasy points. It's kind of crazy that he doesn't get any passing volume whatsoever, especially in the passing touchdowns, and still gets almost 30 fantasy points. That just really goes to show you how great of a season that Jackson Dart is having in fantasy football terms. So Jackson Dart is our quarterback stud of the week. A couple of studs you could have named. Caleb Williams also had a big game in that game against the Giants, as well as Matthew Stafford. Jared Goff also had himself a game too, but Jahmyr Gibbs was really the main target in that game. Now let's move on to the next running back stud, and Jonathan Taylor has definitely been a sensational pick in fantasy football for 2025. Jonathan Taylor really has separated himself among the elite, has become the number 1 overall fantasy running back this season. And Jonathan Taylor, really nice game in a game where we've seen like these 8:30 a.m. games, like the overseas games where a lot of these players don't really perform well. But Jonathan Taylor did just that against the Atlanta Falcons in that overtime game. Overseas, 32 rushing attempts, 244 rushing yards, and 3 touchdowns, a bulk of those coming on that 80-plus yard rushing touchdown that he had in the third quarter. 3 touchdowns, though. That is now, I believe, like a lot of multi-rushing touchdown games that Jonathan Taylor has had this season. He also had a little bit of receiving, 3 receptions, 42 yards, good enough for 52.6 fantasy points. So if you had Jonathan Taylor in your starting lineup, hopefully you did win this matchup. I know I did have a friend of mine that he did have Jonathan Taylor put up 52 points, and he still lost his fantasy matchup this week because his opponent put up over 200 points himself. So Jonathan Taylor is a stud. You could have had a lot of nominees here. I know that Jahmyr Gibbs had a 40 fantasy outing. Breece Hall had back-to-back good fantasy outings as well. Jaylen Warren coming off of a tough outing against the Chargers. But Jonathan Taylor, I think that the overall season earns the stud. And in week number 10, he is my running back stud for this week. Now let's move on to our wide receiver stud in week number 10. That's going to be Jameson Williams of the Lions. And Williams was one of our favorite starts for week number 10, especially with the matchup going against the Washington Commanders, a secondary that has definitely been gettable against opposing wide receivers, and Jameson Williams did just that. 6 receptions, 119 yards, and 1 touchdown. We saw Amon-Ra St. Brown also get a touchdown as well, but Jameson Williams got the most of the yardage-wise there. Williams, 23.9 fantasy points. And this is what I expected for Jameson Williams every single week. It was slow out the gates, and now you're starting to see that connection really start to ramp up between Jared Goff and Jameson Williams. So it was a new look offense, Ben Johnson going to Chicago. So maybe there was a little fluctuation between Jameson Williams and Jared Goff. But Jameson Williams moving forward is definitely a must start in your flex moving forward for the season. Now let's move on to the tight end stud of the week, and that's going to be Cade Otton of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You also could have went with George Kittle here, but Cade Otton and the volume that he's getting, especially without Mike Evans or Chris Godwin in the lineup, you are starting to see Emeka Egbuka and Tez Johnson as your clear wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2. But Cade Otton has definitely really become a top 10 rest of season tight end for you, especially how thin the position has been this season. But Cade Otton, against the New England Patriots, the Bucs did end up losing that game. However, Otton continued his dominance in fantasy football. 9 receptions, 82 yards, good enough for 17.2 fantasy points. So Cade Otton, I think he is also a really nice matchup going up against the Carolina Panthers, a defense that struggled against an opposing tight end, Juwan Johnson. Johnson had nearly 100 receiving yards, got himself a touchdown there. So Cade Otton could definitely make some more noise against an NFC South opponent like the Carolina Panthers. So that is the studs of the week. Now let's go ahead and shift our gears to our duds of the week. Starting off with our Thursday night quarterback in Bo Nix. This was just an ugly game to start off the new week of the NFL season. It was 10-7 game, kind of similar that we saw to the Packers and Eagles game. But Bo Nix, he's been a roller coaster ride for this fantasy season. 150 passing yards, only 1 touchdown. He did throw an interception in this game, but only 7.8 fantasy points. It's going to be tough for him to bounce back because also a tough matchup once again. I thought that this was going to be a great matchup for both Bo Nix, the running backs, Cortland Sutton, Troy Franklin. But Bo Nix has a really tough matchup moving forward against the Kansas City Chiefs, who are second against the quarterback. So that's going to be another tough matchup for both Bo Nix and the rest of the pieces that you have on this offense. We will see if I have any starts or sits for Denver, but this was definitely, a lacking performance from Bo Nix. Now let's move on to our next dud, and that's going to go to the running back category, Ja'Cory Crosky-Merritt. Now, JCM has definitely been a disappointment. We thought with Austin Eckler going down with an injury, being out for the rest of the season, that JCM was going to step into this role because he really played well in the preseason, looked strong in the early weeks of the season. But it had just been non-existent from JCM. At this point, you can't really trust him to start in your lineup, to be honest with you. Drop him maybe at this point, especially with the guys that you have, like the top running backs. I would rather have Tyjae Spears, even like the Arizona Cardinals situation, like with Trey Benson coming back, Amari Delmercado. And the wide receiver options are definitely there with Parker Washington and Shamir Dyke as well. Just some other guys I would like at this point, but only 11 rushing attempts, 30 yards, and only 3 fantasy points. And what was a disappointing performance once again for a Commanders team that has definitely had a disappointing season here in the 2025 campaign. Now let's move on to our wide receiver dud of week number 10. That's Josh Downs of the Indianapolis Colts. Now we have seen really the past couple of weeks in fantasy, Josh Downs has really been a consistent fantasy receiver, but Alec Pierce was really stepping into this role. Really had a nice game against the Atlanta Falcons, and this was just a Jonathan Taylor game. They were just handing the ball off, so Josh Downs didn't really get too much involved. Same with Michael Pittman. Only 1 reception, 3 yards, 2.58 fantasy points. I'm not really too concerned with Josh Downs. I definitely think he still has a viable role in one of the most talented offenses in the NFL. So Josh Downs, I know, is a dud this week, but this is still a wide receiver that I trust in my lineup moving forward. Now let's go on to the tight end dud. He was our stud of the week last week, but Brock Bowers is now on the opposite side of the spectrum, as he only had 1 reception and 31 yards in a game that the Raiders offense has pretty much been non-existent. Let's be honest with you. That's pretty much been the whole entire season for the Raiders. So only 3.7 fantasy points. Flip back to week number 9 when he had over 40 fantasy points in all PPR formats. So Brock Bowers is a dud. I know he's in an awful offense, but especially without Jacoby Myers being there, really the only other target that you're competing with is Trey Tucker. So it was just a really tough matchup going against the Denver Broncos, one of the more talented defenses in the NFL. But Brock Bowers moving forward, I think that's still a tight end that you trust every single week, no matter the matchup. Now that is it for our studs and duds. Now let's go ahead and shift gears to talking about what you should be looking forward to in week number 11, especially with the news and injuries that we have. So let's go ahead and go through some of the top news here. So we do have some injury news out of New England. So the running back situation, Mondre Stevenson is going to be missing his third straight game. So if you do have TreVeyon Henderson, and TreVeyon Henderson is coming off one of his best fantasy outings of this season, putting up over 31 fantasy points in PPR. So we actually saw like some big TreVeyon Henderson runs. So hopefully that continues. And that was, not a slouch defense that he went up against Tampa Bay. So you get the Jets. So I definitely think that this is going to be a smash start for TreVeyon Henderson for the week. Brock Purdy continues to ramp up practice for return. So we will see a Brock Purdy when he will be returning or not. It's unlikely that he's going to be returning in week number 10. So you'll probably see Mac Jones for like the fourth consecutive week. We haven't seen Brock Purdy, it feels like, in ages at this point. So just keep that in mind. J.J. McCarthy, he was limited in practice today as hand bruise, latest ailment in the injuries. So we will have to keep monitoring that to see if J.J. McCarthy is going to be suited up for the Minnesota Vikings this week. That would definitely be crucial, especially if you have guys like Aaron Jones or Jordan Addison, T.J. Hawkinson, or Justin Jefferson for this week. We do have some news coming out of Green Bay. Matt LaFleur is still going to call plays. I know that, it wasn't that great of a scheme that they had against the Philadelphia Eagles. It was a tough matchup, so you really can't say too much about that. So let's go ahead. I'm just scrolling through here. We did have the Travis Hunter injury news. He's going to be out for the season, so that's definitely a blow for the Jacksonville Jaguars offense. We will see if we do have Brian Thomas this week. He did miss last week's game against the Houston Texans. We really saw Parker Washington really get involved in that wide receiver one role. And honestly, I know I didn't mention him in the waiver wire video, but if Parker Washington is available, go pick him up, especially with this Travis Hunter injury. Even if Brian Thomas is on the field, I would still trust Parker Washington, either being like my wide receiver 2 or flex for my fantasy roster. Let's go ahead and see if there's any more news that we need to get to here. So a bit of good injury news the Broncos had Wednesday was Marvin Mims Jr., who suffered a concussion in the win over the Dallas Cowboys and missed 2 games, was a full participant in Wednesday's practice. So we will potentially see Marvin Mims back. That's not a guy that, to be honest with, I wouldn't trust in my lineups. And, you've seen the role of both Troy Franklin and Courtland Sutton. This is a tough match against Kansas City Chiefs, so I'm trying to avoid any Denver Broncos this week. We do have some more Broncos injuries. Broncos had 6 players not participate in practice, including running back J.K. Dobbins. Dobbins is dealing with a foot injury. Trent Sherfield, the wide receiver for the Broncos, dealing with a toe injury. And then they have some defensive players in mind. But the Jets won't have wide receiver Garrett Wilson on Thursday night against the Patriots. Wilson was ruled out for the game after injuring his right knee on Sunday. So if you have Garrett Wilson, make sure you keep him on your bench and not in your starting lineup, so we don't want any 0 fantasy points. And to be honest with you, I don't want any other wide receivers on the Jets. It's pretty much Breece Hall and Mason Taylor are the only 2 viable candidates on that offense that I'm starting. Some other news, Ravens quarterback Lamar Jackson didn't practice today due to what head coach John Harbaugh said is knee soreness. But the team expects Jackson to return to practice on Thursday, so I definitely think that Lamar Jackson should be available and ready to go for their matchup. And I think that's we caught up with all the news in the injuries that have been piling up. This has just been a season full of injuries, especially Jaden Daniels' injury. We will see if he will be returning at all. We did see Joe Burrow returning to the practice field this week. He looks like he's going to be eyeing a return around Thanksgiving. So for now, it'll be Joe Flacco. I believe I did see not Russell Wilson, but Jameis Winston is going to be in line for the start for the New York Giants. So keep that in mind if you have any Giants players on your fantasy roster. All right, that is it for our both news and injuries and our studs and duds. Now let's go ahead and continue with the program with our Week 11 fantasy starts and sits. So as always here, we always give you 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, and 2 tight ends. And then for the sits, we will give you one of each for each position. So let's go ahead and start off with the Week 11 fantasy starts with the quarterbacks. So the first of 2 quarterbacks that we're going to be talking about here that you need to be putting into your starting lineups, that's going to be Dak Prescott of the Dallas Cowboys. Now, the Cowboys are coming off of a bye week here in week number 10, but look at the matchup. I know I said this about Bo Nix. I didn't have Bo Nix, especially in my starts for the week, but I did like the matchup overall for the Broncos offense. So the Las Vegas Raiders, still a defense that have allowed 5 quarterbacks to score 17 plus points. So I think that a lot of people are just going to be looking at this past Thursday night matchup. But it was just a weird and wacky game. I mean, the Thursday night games have been very low scoring. Unless it's the Steelers and the Bengals, that was pretty much the only other game. But looking at his projected total points, 18.8, wouldn't be surprised at all if we do see Dak. Dak has really been consistent over the past couple of weeks, especially with the return of CeeDee Lamb. George Pickens has really had a good fantasy season, as well as Jake Ferguson, and pairing him up with the running back and Javonte Williams there. So his projected passing yards at 251.5. His projected passing touchdowns is at 2. So I really like this matchup for Dak Prescott, and this offense has found their identity. I know that they got blown out in a lot of these games, but look for Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys to score some points against the Raiders defense that has definitely been lacking. Now let's move on to the next quarterback start of the week here. That's going to be Justin Herbert of the Los Angeles Chargers, and Herbert has definitely had himself a season. I mean, the Los Angeles Chargers offense, look at him. I mean, it feels like every week we're talking about those 3 receivers, Ladd McConkey, Quentin Johnston, and Keenan Allen, along with Arondé Gatz getting the tight end there. But it is a nice matchup going against the Jacksonville Jaguars. We did see C.J. Stroud coming off of a good game. Jacksonville had like a 17-point lead at that point, and C.J. Stroud and the offense was able to bounce back and climb their way to a victory this Sunday afternoon. The Jaguars defense, like the Raiders, have given up 17-plus points to 7 quarterbacks here so far in the 2025 campaign. So Justin Herbert, paired with the Chargers offense, I mean, they just had himself a game against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So this is just one of the most talented offenses in the AFC. And the way that the Jaguars defense, they've had some games, sure, this season where they're able to step up and win it for their team, but their defense has definitely been lacking over the past couple of weeks. So I trust Justin Herbert and this Chargers offense to really get things going. Now let's move on to the running back starts. We're going to just roll with Mr. Consistency here in fantasy this season. That's going to be Rico Dowdle of the Carolina Panthers, and Rico Dowdle has definitely taken over as the RB1 in Carolina. At the start of the season, it was mainly Chuba Hubbard. With Hubbard going down with that injury, we did see Dowdle in back-to-back games scored 30-plus fantasy points. And against the New Orleans Saints even, they only scored 7 points, but those 7 points came from Rico Dowdle at the goal line there. So he's continued to get the goal line carries. That's exactly what you want to see from your starting running back. And he has a nice matchup going against the Atlanta Falcons defense. The Falcons, like many teams in the NFL, had their good and their bad games. You could say that Sunday morning's game was definitely one of their bad games that they had this season. The Falcons have allowed the most rushing touchdowns to the running back position. So Rico Dowdle, definitely a safe bet to find the end zone once again. He's definitely found the end zone in a lot of these games this season. So Rico Dowdle, definitely plug him into your lineup. He is projected to get 16.4 fantasy points in PPR formats. So Rico Dowdle, just ride with the hot hand and hope that he scores a couple of touchdowns. I definitely think the rushing yardage total, 89.3, he could definitely get there because look at what Jonathan Taylor did. I know that Rico Dowdle is no Jonathan Taylor, but the sample size definitely there that a lot of these opposing running backs have had these big-time games against this Falcons rush defense. Now let's move on to our next running back, Quinshon Judkins of the Cleveland Browns. A nice matchup against the Baltimore Ravens. This Ravens defense have definitely been gettable, though they are starting to play better as they get healthier here, especially on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. The Ravens have allowed 12-plus points to 9 running backs so far this season, so they have definitely been gettable for opposing running backs. And Quinshon Judkins has definitely had his blow-up games. He has had his dud games at times, but I expect him to get back on track here against the Ravens defense. I mean, a lot of running backs have been able to put up some points. I think that Quinshon Judkins could also provide some really nice receiving volume there, especially with Dylan Gabriel still being the starter. So Quinshon Judkins, a plug and play into your lineups in week number 11. Now let's move on to our starts for our wide receiver positions. We're going to start with Jalen Waddle of the Miami Dolphins, like I mentioned. The matchup at the start of the season, we were actually going after the Dallas Cowboys secondary. Now that has really shifted to the Washington Commanders secondary, a secondary that has allowed 12 wide receivers to score more than 12 fantasy points this season. And Jalen Waddle coming off of a nice showing in the game that the Dolphins absolutely blew out the Bills 30-13. You saw a lot of Devon Achane. Achane had over 40 points in that game in fantasy terms, and Jalen Waddle has really stepped up in this wide receiver one role, especially with Tyreek Hill being out for the season. Washington also getting involved too. He stepped up to wide receiver two. So Jalen Waddle has definitely provided that at least volume there. I know that hasn't been pretty in most of these matchups because the Dolphins have been up and down this season. But a really nice matchup and what could be a high-score game because both defenses aren't that great. But we will have to see. But I do like Jalen Waddle in this spot against the Washington Commanders, a defense that's been giving up a ton of yardage and a ton of points to opposing receivers. Now let's move on to DK Metcalf of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I know that a lot of people aren't going to like this pick, especially with the Steelers not scoring too many points in that Sunday night game against the Los Angeles Chargers. But I do expect a bounce back for both Aaron Rodgers in this offense as they go against the Cincinnati Bengals, a defense that have allowed 9 wide receivers to score 13-plus points. And the Bengals are coming off of the bye week. Didn't really make too many trades on the defense. You still have Trey Hendrickson there, one of the top defensive edge rushers in the league. But DK Metcalf, like most of the Steelers' offense, didn't really do too much. Like I mentioned, though, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if this is one of the more higher-scoring games of the weekend. Joe Flacco in that offense is fine an identity, especially with Joe Burrow being absent from this offense. But looking at his Week 11 projected total points, right at 13.5, can definitely see him do that. Would not be surprised at all if he finds a touchdown because there's not really too much competition in the wide receiver room outside of DK Metcalf. Maybe looking at the tight ends, Darnell Washington, Pat Freiermuth, and your running backs, led by Jalen Warren. So I do like this matchup for DK Metcalf going up against the Cincinnati Bengals, which is going to be a big game overall for the AFC North standings, especially with the Steelers still being ahead of both the Ravens and the Bengals. Now let's move on to our tight ends. We're going to go with Cade Otton of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I'm coming off of a game where he had 9 catches and double-digit targets. I definitely think that's going to continue against the Buffalo Bills. This has been a defense that has definitely been lacking over the past couple of weeks. Just look at what Miami was able to do. And Otton has seen at least 5 targets in 4 straight games, so the target share is definitely there, like I mentioned, especially with the injuries that you have with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. So Cade Otton, Mr. Consistent over the past couple of weeks. It feels like it's been like 3 or 4 straight weeks where he scored at least double-digit points in PPR formats. So I am definitely rolling with Cade Otton in my starting lineup this week. We're also going to be rolling with Kyle Pitts of the Atlanta Falcons. I know that this is also a question mark. Kyle Pitts only scored 5 points. He had a couple of receptions. Really nothing going for the Atlanta Falcons in that game. I know that he did score over 20 points, but you saw 2 of those touchdowns coming from Tyler Algier at the goal line. Like I mentioned, it's a nice matchup going up against the Carolina Panthers. The defense have allowed the six tight ends to score at least 9.9 points this season. And like I mentioned earlier here on the show, we did see Juwan Johnson have one of his best games of the season. 92 receiving yards, 1 touchdown to his name. So Juwan Johnson had a couple of games where it was like dud after dud after dud. And Johnson finally was able to put it together under Tyler Shuck. So maybe we see a similar game from Kyle Pitts where he was able to find the end zone. But nonetheless, though, I do expect the targets and the receptions to tick just up. Looking at his projected total points right at 10, I wouldn't be surprised if he hovers around 12, maybe 13 fantasy points in a game that the Atlanta Falcons desperately need to really not only – in the NFC South race, I think it's like a 2-team race between the Panthers and the Bucs at this point. But if they want to inch back into the playoffs, they really need to win this game against the Panthers. So that is your starts of the week. Now let's go ahead and jump right into our Week 11 fantasy sits of the week. And the first one's going to be Jared Goff of the Detroit Lions. Now, Jared Goff was one of our favorite starts last week as he was going up against the Washington Commanders. However, this matchup has really flipped the other direction as he's facing one of the best defenses in the league in the Philadelphia Eagles. And we just saw what the Eagles did to Jordan Love in the Packers offense. The Packers' lone touchdown was for a rushing touchdown by Josh Jacobs. Eagles, like I mentioned, only one quarterback has scored more than 18 fantasy points this season, and that one quarterback was Jackson Dart, and most of those points came from his rushing side. Jared Goff is going to be more that passing volume there. And the Eagles, the secondary has definitely stepped up in big-time matchups. So Jared Goff in better matchups, I like him. But this week, if you have a better option at the quarterback spot, I even like Joe Flacco this week against Pittsburgh Steelers or Aaron Rodgers in a bounce back. But Jared Goff, he is a very talented quarterback, don't get me wrong, but I just really hate this matchup going up against an Eagles defense that's really just starting to catch fire as of late. Now let's move on to our running back. It feels like Kenneth Walker has been an auto sit at this point, especially with Zach Charbonnet getting those goal line carries and those touchdowns. Kenneth Walker is yet to score a rushing touchdown or even a receiving touchdown this season. He has definitely been one of the more disappointing running backs in fantasy football this season. And the matchup, though, very tough. Going up against the Los Angeles Rams, the defense have allowed the fewest points to opposing running backs. So I'm not even going to say nothing about him. You know what to do. Bench Kenneth Walker. Find a better running back option at this point. Now let's move on to the wide receivers. Next, we're going to go to Courtland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. And it's been boom or bust for Courtland Sutton. The past couple of weeks have definitely been lacking, especially the way that you drafted him at his ADP. It is a tough matchup going against the Kansas City Chiefs, a defense that allowed the fifth fewest points per game to the wide receivers. He is coming off of a disappointing game against the Las Vegas Raiders defense, that, over time this season has given up a ton of points to opposing wide receivers, and Courtland Sutton didn't really get a touchdown or too many yards, so it's really safe his fantasy day. He had 7 points, I think, in PPR formats. But the Chiefs have definitely been stout against opposing wide receivers. So like I mentioned, of our quarterbacks and running backs, you have a better option, go for it. But if you don't really have another option, Courtland Sutton may just be your best option. You have to just roll with him. But if you have a better option, I would bench Courtland Sutton this week. Now let's move on to our final position category. That's going to be the tight end for our sits of the week, and that's going to be Luke Musgrave of the Green Bay Packers. Now, Luke Musgrave, has stepped into this tight end one role, especially with Tucker Kraft being out for the majority or in the rest of the season, actually, with a torn ACL. But the matchup against the New York Giants is actually a tough one on paper. I know the Giants' defense have definitely been gettable, and, opposing quarterbacks has had success. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Jordan Love has a bounce-back game. But this Giants defense really does well against attacking opposing tight ends. It's a defense that allowed only double digits to only 4 tight ends this season. So Luke Musgrave, a talented tight end, you probably picked him up, especially with the injury news and some of the bye weeks that we're dealing with from the Indianapolis Colts and the New Orleans Saints this week. But Luke Musgrave, I don't really like this matchup against the New York Giants. All right, so that is our starts and sits. Now let's go ahead and close things out here as we're going to look at how our team did here in week number 10. Heading into week number 10, we were 6-3, and looking at the score, we ended up moving now to 7-3. Our opponent moves to 3-7 as we did win this game, 154.1 to 121.32. So this was one of our higher scoring games that we were involved in this season. So now let's go on to just the breakdown here, go from position by position. So looking at the quarterbacks, pretty even on both sides. Baker Mayfield, 22.92 fantasy points. Jared Goff, we did go with Jared Goff over Bo Nix, which ended up working out well for us as Goff put up 24.8 fantasy points in the game, where the Detroit Lions really cruised in this game. Looking at the running backs, his 2 running backs really popped off. Kyron Williams had 22.4. TreVeyon Henderson had 28. But for our running backs, it wasn't compared to him, wasn't that great and all. But I'll take it. Double-digit points for both Saquon and Alvin Kamara. Saquon had 13.1. Alvin Kamara had 14.5. One of the best games for Alvin Kamara in that game. If he had a touchdown, I know that he had over 100 yards total in this game, even when the Saints only put up 17 points. But that was definitely one of the best outings for AK this season. Wide receivers for him, definitely a duds for Justin Jefferson only putting up 7.7 and A.J. Brown only putting up 3.3. So we caught a break there for both his starting wide receivers, not really doing too much. Our wide receivers, those combined, had 40 points. JSN continues to be dominant, 20.3, and Emeka Egbuka, 23.5. Tight ends, pretty even as well. Sam Laporta had 10.3. Tyler Warren had 17.9. Flex personnel was very similar. Lab McConkey had 20.7 in that Sunday night game against the Steelers. Troy Franklin had 15 points in that doozy of a game. We had 2 10-7 games, which was absolutely wild to see there. Defenses, though, the Seattle Seahawks continue to be one of the best defense, if not the best defense in fantasy football this season at 21 points. Ravens had 6. Harrison Butker was on the bye week, so it looks like he didn't even pick up a backup kicker to replace him. We did have to get a backup kicker. We did have an injury, I believe, to Kami Fairbairn. Fairbairn was out, so we did have to go with Andy Borregales, the rookie kicker of New England. Only 4 points, but you know what? I'll take that, especially with the late ad that we had there. So looking at the bench, some of the ads that he could have done, definitely could have played. Maybe Caleb Williams just get a couple more points. Rome Odunze had 20. Jalen Warren had 11. On our bench, though, George Kittle had 23.4. So maybe we just need a roll of double tight end at this point. We will see if we do that. Really, outside of that, Zach Charbonnet had 2 rushing touchdowns in that game to get him to 14 points. Brian Thomas was out. Chase Brown was on the bye week. Bo Nix had a dud of a game, only putting up 5. Same with Romeo Doubs and Bam Knight. Dobbs only had 1.5, and Bam Knight had 4.3. I think at this point, we're just going to get rid of Cam Scatterby. He's not going to be, available the rest of the season, so I think that's going to be one of our moves there. So let's go through the rest of the matchups. Looks like took down Raquel's remarkable team, 121-78. So moves to 3-7. Raquel's remarkable team falls to 2-8. MDR takes down Tyler's talented team. Tyler's talented team moves to 2-8. Meanwhile, MDR wins this matchup 108-70, and he moves to 6-4. A big upset that we had there, the Mushrooms took down DeBurs. DeBurs was the first place overall team heading into week number 10, but Mushrooms ended up winning this game 123-117. And finally, Doge took down Ben's best team, as both of those teams now moved to 6-4. So looking at the overall standings, I think that we finally made a move into second place, I believe, if things have gone our way there. So let's go ahead and take a look at the standings. We actually have officially moved into the number 2 spot. So DeBird still number 1, 8-2, though we are 1 game back. We did lose the overall head-to-head matchup, so that's still going to play into that. Mushrooms is at third place, but I believe that in points total. So we're both 7-3. We have a couple of 6-4 teams. Ben's best team, MDR and Doge, are all at 6-4. You have 2 3-7 teams and 2 2-8 teams. Looks like 2 teams have been eliminated already, with Team 9 and Team 10 being eliminated at this point in the season. So looking at the points for, we're still in the race here. I know that we're only a couple of points away from being second place overall, with Ben's best team at 1250. The Birds, that's going to be definitely tough, but overall we have 1,249.4 points, and allowed, still playing some good defense, of only allowing just over 1,000 on the season. So we won 3 in a row, and now moving our overall division and overall record to 7-3. So pretty good. So far, so good. I think that we had a slow start to the season, but we have definitely picked it up this season. So let's go ahead and go to week number 11 to see if we have any buys, and we have 2 buys. However, with Alvin Kamara being out, so it looks like Chase Brown is going to be back in the lineup. And a good thing for us, we have George Kittle coming. We have him coming off of the bench. So that is definitely really good to have. My 2 quarterbacks, I don't really like any of their matchups this week. Jared Goff going up against the Eagles and Bo Nix. So we might have to go a different route. Cam Scatterby, I really appreciate you, but we are going to have to drop you out of our injured reserve. I think at this point it's just, kind of a wasted roster spot. I know it is an injured reserve. So let's go ahead and take a look first before we try and make some moves heading into our week 11 matchup, excuse me. But let's just go through, let's see. Let me go through our recent activity, and we will go through the waiver wire moves to see if any of the key guys that I mentioned on yesterday's video went through there. So let's go through the recent activity here, and then we will finish things up to see what roster moves or updates that we need to make. So Jameson Williams was added. He dropped for Matthew Golden. Other moves that we had, really only two moves made by the same team. We have Nick Chubb being dropped for Matthew Stafford. That would definitely be nice to pick up Stafford. But let's go through the players. Let's start with the quarterbacks. I'm going to just pick out a couple of players that I like week number 11 and moving forward that you can pick up yourself. So Jordan Love, really nice matchup going against the New York Giants. It actually might be an ad that we may need to make for this season. Sam Darnold, that's a tough matchup. Wouldn't pick up him. And Aaron Rodgers and Joe Flacco would definitely be two ads. Maybe roll Joe Flacco against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Either go with him or Jordan Love. We may just be going with Joe Flacco or Aaron Rodgers at that point. But if you do need a streaming quarterback, Jordan Love, Aaron Rodgers, and Joe Flacco would be my top three options to add this week. Running back options that I would like to add, RJ Harvey. That's a tough matchup there. I'm not really seeing too much. Tyler Algier, really nice handcuff behind Bijan Robinson. You're starting to see him get more. A lot of the bulk of the work is started. Not really to become a 50-50 split that you're seeing in Seattle, but still a nice option to have. And then Tyjae Spears, but running backs are pretty thin in this league. Wide receiver options that you have Matthew Golden against the New York Giants, but he was just dropped. Trey Tucker against the Dallas Cowboys. This would definitely be a huge game to pick up Trey Tucker against the 31st defense. Going up against that, Ted Johnson would also be a nice add. Parker Washington, too. It is a tough matchup going against the Chargers, but Parker Washington, especially if Brian Thomas is out, that would definitely be a plug-and-play option for your fantasy rosters. Tight ends available in this league. Theo Johnson, that would definitely be a solid add going up against Green Bay defense. That has definitely been gettable against opposing tight ends. Same with Colson Loveland going up against Minnesota's. Streaming defenses, let's go through that really quickly here. I think that the top streaming defenses, the Falcons against the Carolina Panthers. I don't know if I would touch the Cowboys defense, but it may be. The Cowboys have had a couple of games where they had double-digit fantasy outings. But really outside of that, don't really see too much. Maybe you go pick up the Chargers against the Jags. So Chargers against the Jags, Falcons against the Panthers. And you know what? Let's throw in the Cowboys against the Las Vegas Raiders. That would be some streaming defenses that I would like to pick up. All right, let's make some quarterback changes. I think we are going to go with Joe Flacco and ride him as our starter. Like I mentioned, I just don't really like the matchups for both Jared Goff and Bo Nix. So for now, for this week, I think we are going to be dropping. I don't think we honestly need Zach Charbonnet at this point, so we're going to be dropping Charbonnet. He has a tough matchup nonetheless against the Los Angeles Rams. So let's go ahead and pick him up. And we will start Joe Flacco this week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think that's really all the options there. I would like a better wide receiver because Troy Franklin has a big-time matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs. So let's see. We have a couple of running backs options. I think we're going to go with Romeo Doubs actually against versus Troy Franklin in this matchup. Let's go ahead and go through Doubs to see how he did. I know that he didn't have that great of a game because he only had 1.5 points, but Carolina, he had 7 receptions, 91 yards, 10 targets in that game. So I do expect a bounce back. I think for now, we will go Romeo Doubs over Troy Franklin in that one. Seattle does have a tough matchup. Andy Borregales, I think that let's go ahead and move away from him. Let's see if we can get another kicker here because I think we are going to go with, pick up Kami Fairbairn again. We will see if he is back and healthy for this one. But I think I am going to go for a different direction for the kicker spot here heading into week 11 of the season. So we do have Cairo Santos. I think we are going to go pick back up Kaimi Fairbairn. He is questionable, but he's definitely been a consistent fantasy kicker for us whenever we've had him on the roster so far. So let's go ahead and drop Andy Borregales. He was good enough for 1 week, but Kaimi Fairbairn has been our long-term solution at the kicker spot. So I think that's how we're going to roll things here. Our starting quarterback is going to be Joe Flacco, running backs Saquon Barkley and Chase Brown. And then wide receivers, JSN and Emeka Egbuka. Kittle getting the start at tight end. Romeo Dobbs getting the flex. Seahawks will be getting will be the starting defense, and Kaimi Fairbairn will be the kicker. All right, we do have a question coming in here as a start sit. Start three, Trevion, Etienne, Swift, Judkins, and Devontae Smith. Definitely the two that I'm starting is Trevion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins. Judkins was one of my favorite starts for the week. Trevion Henderson also start with Ramondre Stevenson being out this week. And I'm going to also roll with Devontae Smith as I think that he's really been nice over the past couple of weeks. And even in a game where the Eagles scored 10 points, I really like the Eagles matchup this week. So I roll Devontae Smith, Judkins, and Trevion. So let's go look ahead to our Week 11 matchup. We are facing off against Mushrooms this week, who is, I believe, like right there with us. So once again, we're heading into a big-time matchup here in week number 11 of this season. It's getting crunch time, like I mentioned. The fantasy playoffs are just around the corner. All right, so let's go ahead and go through our matchup there. 7-3 versus 7-3. So like I mentioned, like this could be playing for the number 2 seed at this point, and maybe the number 1 seed, depending on what DeBirds does there. So looks like he's going to be full strength. Patrick Mahomes is his starting quarterback. This is honestly quite hilarious because this is very similar to my other fantasy league that I'm involved in. But our previous matchup, we did take 126 to 113. But looking at his overall roster, he has Mahomes as his quarterback, Bijan Robinson, Kamani Vidal is his 2 running backs. Then he has Drake London and Devontae Smith. Smith has the Detroit Lions. The Lions secondary has definitely been gettable against opposing wide receivers. He does have Travis Kelce, so he has that Mahomes and Kelce stack. His flex is Wan'Dale Robinson, Packers defense, and Eddie Pinheiro. And Pinheiro, got to talk about him. He's definitely been one of the best kickers in all fantasy football this season. Smash the like button. Thanks. I really appreciate you both tuning in to the live show and providing your support to the channel. I really appreciate it. Hope I was able to answer your question. If you have any more advice, let me know down in the comments. And even, you could drop your comments in this video itself. But I think that's going to be it for our another weekly live show. We will be back, next Wednesday night as we will be recapping what happened in week number 11 and looking forward to week number 12 as the trade deadline in fantasy is right around the corner and the fantasy playoffs will be here before you know it. So we will be here all throughout the season, leading you to your fantasy championship, hopefully. And that will be it for our fantasy live show once again. So I appreciate everybody for tuning into tonight's show. Be sure to tune into all of our fantasy football and college football content throughout the duration of this week. Hit that like and subscribe button, and we will see you all next time.